Beginning in the 1970s, a new and far more dangerous type of Islamic terrorist organization emerged. Unlike Palestinian nationalist groups, whose goals were political and territorial, these new movements did not seek a state, land, or negotiation. One historian described the difference perfectly. Earlier terrorists used violence to get a seat at the negotiating table. These new extremists wanted to blow up the table entirely. Their ideology was not nationalist, it was religious, anti-modern, and revolutionary. They rejected Western ideas, values, and culture, yet eagerly embraced modern weapons and technology to wage war against them. Their ideal society was modeled on the 8th century Islamic caliphate, not the modern Middle East. Following the September 11, 2001 attacks, al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden released statements outlining the goals he claimed would be necessary to end future attacks. Some of his demands focused on social and moral issues, including banning gambling, alcohol consumption, sexual promiscuity, homosexuality, and the charging of interest on loans. These proposals reflected his strict interpretation of Islamic law and his belief that modern societies had become morally corrupt. However, these demands represented only a small part of his broader vision. Bin Laden also insisted that the entire world ultimately convert to Islam, that Islamic law become the basis of government everywhere, and that Western civilization abandon what he viewed as its immoral cultural and political foundations. He called for the destruction of Israel, the withdrawal of American military forces from all Muslim-majority countries, and the rejection of many aspects of modern Western culture. Taken together, these demands revealed that bin Laden's objectives extended far beyond specific political grievances or regional disputes. His ultimate goal was a global religious revolution that would fundamentally transform governments, societies, and cultures around the world according to his extremist interpretation of Islam. For bin Laden and al-Qaeda, terrorism was not merely a tactic to achieve limited political concessions. It was a tool they believed could help bring about a sweeping reordering of the international system. As the Palestinian movement evolved during the late 20th century, a major ideological shift took place. Earlier organizations such as al-Fatah were primarily nationalist and secular. Their leaders focused on political goals such as Palestinian independence and self-determination, and their membership included both Muslim and Christian Palestinians. Over time, however, new groups emerged that viewed the conflict not simply as a political struggle, but as a religious obligation. These Islamist organizations framed their cause as a form of jihad or holy war, and saw the conflict as part of a broader religious mission. The rise of these groups was aided by support from several governments in the Middle East. Countries such as Iran and Syria provided varying degrees of funding, training, weapons, and political backing to militant organizations operating in Palestine. Other regional governments at times supported such movements because they believed doing so would weaken their rivals, increase their influence, or contribute to instability that served their strategic interests. This transformation marked a significant change in the nature of Palestinian militancy. Rather than emphasizing secular nationalism, many of the newer organizations drew their legitimacy from religious ideology and portrayed the conflict as part of a larger struggle involving the Islamic world. Among the most important of these Islamist movements were Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, two organizations that would play major roles in shaping the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in the decades that followed. As Islamist militancy spread throughout the Middle East, several organizations emerged that combined religious ideology with armed struggle and terrorism. Among the most significant were Hezbollah and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, PIJ, both of which viewed the conflict with Israel as part of a broader religious and political struggle. Hezbollah, a Shia Islamist organization based in Lebanon, received substantial support from Iran and developed into one of the most powerful militant groups in the region. The organization opposed the existence of Israel and sought to challenge Israeli influence through both military and terrorist operations. Over time, Hezbollah expanded its activities beyond Lebanon, carrying out or being linked to attacks and operations that extended its influence onto the international stage. Palestinian Islamic Jihad, by contrast, is a Sunni Islamist organization operating primarily within the Palestinian territories. Smaller than Hamas, PIJ has consistently maintained a hardline position, rejecting negotiations and political compromise. Its leaders argue that armed struggle is the only acceptable means of achieving Palestinian goals and establishing an Islamic state in Palestine. Consequently, the organization has focused almost exclusively on militant and terrorist activities rather than participation in electoral politics or peace processes. Although both Hezbollah and Palestinian Islamic Jihad directed much of their efforts against Israel, their hostility increasingly extended beyond Israel itself. They came to view the United States and its Western allies as key supporters and protectors of Israel, and as symbols of Western political and cultural influence in the Middle East. As a result, many Islamist militants broadened their struggle from a regional conflict to a wider confrontation with Western powers, setting the stage for the rise of international jihadist movements that would become increasingly prominent in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. The most significant transnational jihadist organization to emerge in the late 20th century was al-Qaeda, founded by Osama bin Laden. Unlike earlier militant groups that focused primarily on local or regional conflicts, al-Qaeda pursued a global agenda. Its leaders sought to unite Islamist militants across national boundaries and wage what they viewed as a worldwide struggle against their enemies. Al-Qaeda was responsible for several of the deadliest terrorist attacks of the modern era. In 1998, the organization carried out bombings against US embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, killing hundreds of people and injuring thousands more. 2 years later, al-Qaeda attacked the USS Cole while it was refueling in Yemen. The group's most devastating operation came on September 11, 2001, when hijacked commercial airplanes were used in coordinated attacks against targets in the United States, resulting in the deaths of nearly 3,000 people. These attacks were part of al-Qaeda's broader ideological mission. The organization sought to remove Western influence from Muslim-majority countries, overthrow secular governments in the Islamic world, and inspire a global jihadist revolution that would reshape political systems according to its extremist interpretation of Islam. Al-Qaeda's leaders argued that the United States was the key obstacle to these goals because of its military presence, political influence, and support for governments they opposed. Bin Laden and other al-Qaeda leaders believed that the United States, despite its immense military power, was politically vulnerable. They argued that spectacular terrorist attacks could weaken American resolve, provoke costly military responses, and ultimately encourage broader resistance to Western influence throughout the Muslim world. This strategy made al-Qaeda one of the most influential and dangerous terrorist organizations of the early 21st century and helped transform terrorism into a truly global security challenge. Bin Laden and other al-Qaeda leaders repeatedly argued that the United States lacked the willingness to endure long and costly conflicts. In their view, America's military was extremely powerful, but its political leaders and public would abandon military commitments if casualties became too high or if the costs of intervention appeared too great. To support this belief, they pointed to a series of historical events that they interpreted as evidence of American weakness. They cited the Vietnam War as the first major example. After years of fighting, rising casualties, and growing public opposition, the United States withdrew its forces from Vietnam. To jihadist extremists, this suggested that sustained losses could eventually force the United States to retreat, regardless of its military strength. The 1979-1981 Iran hostage crisis reinforced this perception. When Iranian students seized the US embassy in Tehran and held 52 Americans hostage for 444 days, the United States appeared unable to secure their immediate release. A rescue attempt failed and resulted in the deaths of 8 American servicemen. Extremists later pointed to the crisis as evidence that the United States was reluctant to escalate conflicts, even when directly challenged. They also focused on the 1983 bombing of the US Marine barracks in Beirut, Lebanon. A suicide truck bomb killed 241 American Marines, one of the deadliest attacks against US forces before September 11th. Soon afterward, the Reagan administration withdrew American troops from Lebanon. To many extremists, the withdrawal seemed to confirm that inflicting heavy casualties could influence American policy. The First Gulf War of 1991 was interpreted in a similar way. Although the United States successfully led a coalition that expelled Iraqi forces from Kuwait, it stopped short of overthrowing Saddam Hussein's government. Jihadist leaders viewed this restraint not as a strategic decision, but as another indication that the United States lacked the determination to pursue a conflict to its ultimate conclusion. The events in Somalia during 1993 further strengthened this belief. American forces had entered the country as part of a humanitarian mission, but after 18 US soldiers were killed during the Battle of Mogadishu, later popularized as Black Hawk Down, the Clinton administration withdrew US forces. Extremists concluded that relatively small losses could persuade the United States to abandon overseas commitments. Al-Qaeda leaders also pointed to terrorist attacks that they believed received limited military responses. In 1993, terrorists detonated a bomb beneath the World Trade Center in New York, hoping to bring down both towers. The attack killed 6 people, but failed to achieve its larger objective. Because the US government primarily pursued the perpetrators through law enforcement and the courts, extremists concluded that America viewed terrorism as a criminal problem rather than an act of war. Similar conclusions were drawn from the 1998 bombings of US embassies in Kenya and Tanzania and the 2000 attack on the USS Cole in Yemen. Although the United States responded with missile strikes, diplomacy, sanctions, and other measures, Al-Qaeda leaders saw the responses as limited and insufficient. In their minds, these incidents demonstrated a pattern of American caution rather than decisive retaliation. Taken together, these events formed a narrative that became central to al-Qaeda's strategy. Bin Laden and his followers convinced themselves that the United States was militarily powerful but politically vulnerable. They believed that large-scale terrorist attacks could inflict enough casualties and fear to force the United States to retreat from the Middle East and reduce its involvement in world affairs. This reasoning helped shape al-Qaeda's decision to carry out the attacks of September 11, 2001. The organization expected that the attacks would demonstrate American vulnerability and ultimately cause the United States to withdraw from the Muslim world. Instead, the attacks triggered the global war on terror, leading to major US military campaigns in Afghanistan and elsewhere, outcomes that differed dramatically from what al-Qaeda's leaders had anticipated.